What are you doing?
Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about lesson 6.6 from Algebra 1, which is the the point slope form of a line. Before we do that, let's do a little review of things we've done earlier on in the year that are going to be useful for us. The first one is going to be just the distributive property. So as a reminder here, if we're using the distributive property, that means we're multiplying a number times a quantity in parentheses, and we just have to multiply everything in those parentheses, each term, by that number out front. So here we're going to take 2 times x, which is 2x, 2 times 3, which is a positive 6. And just a reminder, we don't need that positive in front there, but that is positive because a positive 2 times a positive x is a positive 2x. Go ahead and try those next 3, and then we'll go over them in just a second. Okay, so hopefully you had a chance to try those. You pause the video. When we do the rest of these, you can check how you did. So here, 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. On this one, we're distributing a negative 2, so negative 2 times x is negative 2x, and negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. And on the last one, we've got a bunch of negative signs, so negative 2 times x is negative 2x, and negative 2 times negative 3 is a positive 6, so a plus 6 there. The second thing we're going to review is the slope formula. So this was just on our last quiz, and we'll be working with this a lot over the next couple of units. So we've got our slope is the y minus the y1 over the x minus the x1. And when we plug these numbers in, we have to be really careful about our negative signs. So here, if I do 3 minus negative 2, I need to make sure I've got the minus sign from the equation and the negative sign from the 2. Then on the bottom, I'm going to do a negative 4 minus 2. So I need to go in the same order. If I start with the negative 3 for the y's, I've got to start with the negative 4 for the x's. Then I can go ahead and actually do that. As a reminder, really important thing today is going to be this minus a negative. When you see that, remember minus a negative is adding. So 3 plus 2 is 5. And then negative 4 minus 2 is negative 6. And we don't want to leave that as 5 over negative 6. We want to write it as negative 5/6 with a negative out front or on the top number. We don't like to leave that negative just hanging out in the denominator of a fraction if we can help it. Moving on here, what we're going to take a look at is point slope form now. And all this comes from is just taking the slope formula that we have and making a quick little change to it. So what we're going to do to change the slope formula around is we are going to multiply both sides by x minus x1. And we're allowed to multiply both sides of an equation as long as it's by the same thing. And what you're going to notice here is just like any time we've multiplied something in the denominator with something in the numerator, we're multiplying by reciprocals there, that's going to just make a big 1. That's going to kind of cancel each other out or undo each other. And that is just going to leave us with this equation right here. And I'm just going to flip it around left for right and write it like this. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And that is our new form there. I'm going to put some stars on that, maybe. And that is called our point slope form of a line. And as you can probably guess here, point slope form is going to tell us the slope, which is still m. M is always going to be slope, and a point on the line. Rather than specifically telling us the intercept, this one tells us a point. And what's happening here is the y1 and x1 are just the y coordinate and the x coordinate of any point on the line. It's got to be the same point, and the m is the slope. And so all we have to do to use this formula is plug in a number there, plug in a slope, plug in the x coordinate there, and that's our point slope form. So we're going to go ahead and do that a few times here. The first one we'll start off with fairly easy. It's got all positive numbers, which is nice. And all we're going to do is just remember here that this is my original formula. And so where the y1 goes, that's just the y coordinate. I'll do a little color coding here. So if that's the y coordinate, I put it there. The x coordinate goes there, and my slope goes in for m. That's point slope form. At that point right now, that is the equation of a line. And just to kind of show you here that that is the equation of a line, if I open up a tab for Desmos, there we go, and I type that in, y minus 2 equals 3 times x plus, or x minus 1, you can see it graphs a line right there. Now, we are going to take another step here and take that formula that's in, or form that's in point slope form, and turn it into slope intercept form. And so to do that, what we need to do is, first of all, distribute. So we've got our 3 times x minus 1, we're going to do 3 times x, which is 3x, 3 times negative 1, which is negative 3. And the important thing to understand here is we didn't do anything to the other side. All we did is distribute on the right side. The left side did not change at all. Then we can go back and actually start to simplify our equation a little bit and try to get the y isolated by itself. If I want my y by itself, I'm going to have to get rid of this negative 2 by adding 2 to both sides. That's going to make that turn into a 0 and just leave y on the left. And I'm only adding like terms over here. So the plus 2 is only getting added to this minus 3. The 3x stays the same, and a negative 3 plus 2 is a negative 1. And that's my equation in slope-intercept form. Once we're in slope-intercept form, if we want to graph the line, we need to think about what's our y-intercept. Well, that's negative 1. So I'll graph it on the line. What's my slope? Well, that is 3 over 1. And so I'll graph a rise of 3, a run of 1, and connect my dots to make the line. As you can see here, that first point that it goes to is actually the original point that we were starting with, the point 1, 2. So this point slope form had enough information to graph it already because we knew what point it went through, and we knew that the rise was 3 and the run was 1. So we can always graph from point slope 2, but a lot of times we're going to put it into point or slope intercept because we like that form a lot. Okay, next one's got some negative signs in it, so this makes things just a little harder. We've got to be careful with things like what's a minus a negative, what's a negative times a negative, those kind of things. So I'll color code a little bit here as I start. The y coordinate goes in next to the y. The x coordinate goes in next to the x. Make sure that it's minus, and then you're plugging in a negative 2. And the slope is negative 2. That goes there. Before we go any further here, anytime I see a minus a negative, I want to make sure I write that as plus, because minus a negative is addition. Now we can go through and apply our distributive property. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. Negative 2 times a positive 2 is negative 4. And the left side of the equation has not changed. Make sure that's still there. Make sure you've still got an equal sign. And then our last step is going to be to solve for y, and I will do that by using inverse operations. If I see a minus 5, I've got to do a plus 5. And I get y equals negative 2x plus 1. Because negative 4 plus 5 is 1. On this side, that's zeroed out. Last thing I'm going to do is graph the line. So my y-intercept here is 1. I will plot that on my y-axis. My slope is negative 2, which is really negative 2 over 1. So I will go down 2 and over 1. And I can see there is my line. And just as a quick little check here, you can see right there, that's the point negative 2, 5. So we know it does go through the point negative 2, 5. And anywhere along that graph, we can check our slope. It is negative 2 over 1. Okay, on this next one, practice. I want you to try this on your own. So try plugging in those numbers. Think about your minus and negatives and change those to pluses. Then try to distribute and solve for y. Pause this video for like 2 or 3 minutes and actually give that a try, and then hit play and start this up again. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's go ahead and go over it and see how you did. Remember, it's really important that we practice these on our own because you have to be able to do this on your own. So if I see a -3, I'm plugging that in for y. I see my -2. That's my x coordinate, so it's going in with the x. And I see my slope is 3, so that goes there. Before I move on, I want to take care of these minus negatives. So minus a negative is a plus, minus a negative is a plus. And we just got rid of all the negative signs, which is great. That's going to make this easier. Next step is distributive property. So on the right-hand side, 3 times x is 3x. 3 times 2 is 6, so positive 6. We're going to be really slow now, aren't we? And the left-hand side of the equation has not changed at all. And then I'm going to solve this one for y by getting rid of this plus 3 by doing a minus 3. That'll zero out there, leaving me with just y on the left. And then I've got my 3x, and then a plus 6 minus 3 is a positive 3. That's my equation in slope-intercept form. Now I can go ahead and graph that. My y-intercept is 3, so you can plot that right there. My slope is 3 over 1. And so I could graph that as an up 3 over 1. And you see that doesn't quite fit on my graph. But just a reminder that that's the same slope as a -3 over -1. So I could go down 3 and backwards 2, or backwards 1, and also get to the same place. And I can also check that my point, -2, -3, right there, is on my graph. And if I follow from that point up 3 over 1, you can see I still get the same slope. So in point-slope form and slope-intercept form, we can graph the line from either one of those because we know a starting point and we know a slope. Okay, last one here is just with 2 points. So they don't tell us the slope, but that's okay because we just did this at the beginning. We can find the slope. We know we've got to subtract our subtract our y coordinates on the top. That one's pretty easy. When we subtract our x coordinates, we need to be really careful. That's mean -3 minus -2. On the top, that's 2. On the bottom, minus a negative is plus. That gives me -1. And a 2 divided by -1 is a -2. We don't want to leave that -1 in the denominator. When we go to plug in our points to our point-slope form, we can pick either point that we like. I'm just going to pick this one because it's first. Why not? Which means the 4 is going to go in with the y. The -2 is going to go with the x. Make sure it's minus -2. And our slope is -2. Before I move on at all, I'm going to change that minus a negative to a plus. And now I can simplify and solve for y. I will distribute. So -2 times x is -2x. -2 times a positive 2 is a -4. And the left side has not changed at all. Then I'm going to use inverse operations to get the y by itself. So I'll do a +4 to zero that side out and leave me with just y. I'll do a +4 over here, but those are additive inverses too. That zeroes out as well. And I get y equals -2x. What we need to remember with this is this still has a y-intercept. It's just 0 now. And our slope is -2 over 1. And so I'm going to go down 2 over 1. And that's my point to plot. And if I draw my line here, you'll see right there is my point. Right there is my point, -2, 4. And if I was to go up to here, that would be my point, -3, 6. And you can see between those, I have a rise and run of down 2 over 1. And so we can see it does go through those 2 points, and it does have a slope of -2, just like we found. So your practice is going to be a lot like this. You are going to be looking for, using your your slope, your point slope form to put those numbers into the point slope form, distribute, get the y by itself, and then graph the line. You're going to do a couple of those where they give you the slope. And then the more advanced ones where you've got to use your slope formula and you find the slope yourself and then plug that in and simplify it. Okay. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And we'll be doing the practice and the CFU tomorrow.